हे लावलं स्विमिंग कर रहे
रात्रभर आम्ही येऊन पण शिवायला
परीक्षण करून बघू का?
टेबल आता पाहिजे तर सांगायला पाहिजे ना. त्याला 2 टेबल सांगितलं त्यांनी केले 2 पैशाच्या हिशोबाने
एंगल चेक कर ना, एंगल कॅमेराचा बरोबर आहे.
स्पीकर उचला पाहिजे ना, बुकला तिकडे
हा मला बघतो
बरोबर वाटतं. एक हे पण आपण माहीत चालू
मी तिकडे
हा थांबतो काय तिकडनं बोलवता ना, तिकडे जाऊ ना.
नाही मी इकडून, पण ह्या स्पीकरचा आवाज तो पिकअप करतो.
तेवढा ट्राय करून बघा. कोणीतरी फोन करा बोलतो.
उधर स्क्रीन छोटी आहे म्हणून तुम्हाला वाटतं.
चला हे का
मुझे कल सुबह हमारे क्लास टीम में फॉरवर्ड नहीं होता, यू नो ना शेयर आपको नंबर कंप्लीट I was also trying to explain
10 15 तक अनुष्का मागे जाता मागे जाता मागे जाता आहे इथे जाता
हेलो हेलो, चेक चेक चेक, हेलो 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 हेलो, अभी देखो आया क्या? हेलो 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 हेलो, चेक, हेलो 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 हेलो, अभी देखो, अभी भी नहीं आया। हाँ, हेलो 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 हेलो, टीम्स है टीम्स। हेलो, अभी भी नहीं आ रहा है। हेलो चेक, हेलो 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 हेलो, आ रहा है आवाज? ओके ओके ओके, तो ह्याच्यावर गेलेला रे साऊंड, त्याचा जो होता ना त्याच्यावर गेलेला ह्याच्यावरती माईक. आता हा काय हा घेतला मायक्रोफोन त्याच्यावर, आता स्पीकरनी बोलला तर हा कॅच करेल. हा आ रहा है ना बरोबर. हा,
Every time. That's breaking down
वो वहाँ से होगा आपके लैपटॉप नहीं होगा तुमचं काय डिस्प्ले काय आहे सर
तो वाला होतोय आता.
तो शिफ्ट काय होते असं नाही करता
नाही, त्यांना एक्झॅक्ट याच्यामध्ये बसवायचं आहे, काहीतरी ऍडजस्ट करतात ते.
और इसको स्पॉटेड ऑफ कर इसको क्लिक ऑन द टॉप 3 डॉट्स पर क्लिक कर. अरे यहाँ
अरे
ये 3 डॉट्स है ना उसको. हाँ ये किया है एग्जिट स्पॉटलाइट. हाँ हाँ इधर क्या आ रहा है अभी अपने को कौन सा जो प्रत्युष है ना ये स्क्रीन चाहिए ना आपने. हाँ ये आ गया ना अभी.
अभी इस पे कुछ नहीं करना है,
अभी ये रहने देने का ना पर अपना चालू है ना इस पे. अरे बॉल आधा कैमरा ले लिया इसको ये कर दो. बट इट्स नॉट कमिंग ऑन टीम.
वो यहाँ पे तो अपन टीम कर देता टीम से
नहीं यहाँ पे नीचे है स्क्रीन.
यहाँ पे टीम
अच्छा ओके.
और वहाँ से ये शेयर्ड स्क्रीन
हाँ सुधे ना जाना चाहिए.
से उधर कोई आती है उनकी स्क्रीन कनेक्ट नहीं करी हुई अपन तो ये वाला ही कनेक्ट करा हुआ है.
ठीक है.
उनके कारण देखो और प्रॉब्लम की कट हो रहा है
भाई टीम पे ये उसका स्क्रीन नहीं आ रहा है. I just see
कितना साइज कट हो रहा है साइज अभी कट हो रहा है आपका वीडियो में?
हाँ नहीं वो क्या है साइज कट के बाद में वो दिख ही नहीं रहा है अभी ये यहाँ पे दिखना चाहिए ना वो
हाँ
ये जो इधर दिख रहा है वो यहाँ पे दिखना चाहिए वो दिख नहीं रहा है
तो मैं जरा पीछे से भी ठीक करते हैं
A very good morning, and a warm welcome to the esteemed guests, faculty, and students. It is a great pleasure and anticipation that we gather here today for the commencement of the Kamla Raheja Memorial Lecture Series at Upnagar Section Mandal's Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture and Environmental Studies for the academic year 2023-24. As we embark on this enlightening journey of knowledge and discourse, we are honored to extend a warm welcome to our director, Mr. Manoj Parmar. Mr. Parmar's illustrious career, marked by a deep commitment to excellence and innovation, serves as a guiding light for all of us. With a distinguished educational background in urban design and architecture, and a rich tapestry of experience that includes a brief yet impactful stint in the USA, before establishing his own practice, MBA Designs, in 1991, Mr. Parmar embodies the spirit of ingenuity and dedication. Since joining the Institute in 1992, Mr. Parmar has not only shared his wealth of knowledge and experience with our community through teaching, but has also contributed significantly to theoretical writings of architecture and urbanism, enriching our understanding on these fields. His remarkable contributions extend beyond academia, with his private practice in architecture and urban design, yielding numerous commendable projects that have left an indelible remark on the landscape of our nation. Today, as we await our director's address, let us extend our deepest gratitude for his unwavering commitment to excellence and his invaluable contributions to our institution and the wider community. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Mr. Manoj Parmar as he graces with us with his wisdom and insight. I didn't want an introduction will be here. Thanks to His Excellency, thanks to the team. Good morning to all of you. On behalf of Nagar City Mandal's Kamla Raheja Academy, Institute for Architecture and Environmental Studies, that we invite you to KRMS, this Kamla Raheja Memorial Lecture Series, founded by Kamla Raheja Foundation. This has a long history, and we could even summarize all things that have happened in the past. I'll try to kind of capture the spirit of what it constitutes. The long evolution of KRMS has witnessed systematic shifts in pedagogy over a period of 31 years of its existence. The emerging pedagogy is a product of a long-term drawn philosophical foundation by our previous three directors. And this follows the KRMS is a platform that was imagined way back. It's a platform to assimilate, project, and strategize academic pedagogy of emerging kind, along with what it is also a time to trace back the historic pedagogy trajectories and move toward larger rationale of emerging of architectural development. The formative circumstances of KRMS had to deal with existing structure of evaluation-based academics and slowly moving into anything based academics. Architecture has emerged as an assemblage of various forces along with multidisciplinary theoretical discourse on contemporary issues and its relevance in Indian context. The emergence of multidisciplinary understanding, KRMS Encounter Series, annual journal reflection, which we have launched tomorrow, and an important attendance to form KRMS as an important learning center in the city. KRMS has also changed for a period of time. Earlier, KRMS were very monolithic in its form. They slowly resulted into discussion on diverse practices, academic research, book launch, along with the Industrial Design Dissertation Fellowship, that is the BRP, and urban dialogue with IMA and with urban design and urban conservation. The future of architectural pedagogy dwells on what we do and what can it become. That is negotiation between now and then. With this assumption, we strive to look at few questions. How multidisciplinary discourse facilitates architectural discussion? How urban question facilitates architectural question? Or how global phenomena of climate change and many other factors reducing the speed of architecture. I think these are the things that really concern us. I know that these questions are far more complex than it appears, especially when we debate Indian architecture and urbanity. With this, I open KRMLS for further proceedings, and with the hope that we continue to add newer narratives in our academic and architectural conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam. It is with pleasure and excitement that we extend a warm welcome to Professor Pratyush Shankar, Provost of Navratna University and the Dean of the School of Environmental Design and Architecture, Navratna University, Vadodara, India. Professor Shankar's illustrious career is marked by a remarkable dedication to academia, research, and design innovation. His recent recognition as the International Ambassador for the University of Bonn, Germany, and the esteemed Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship in 2015, hosted at the University of Bonn, Germany, stands as a testament to his global impact and influence. Prior to his current roles, Professor Pratyush served as an acting Dean of Architecture and head of the undergraduate program at SET University, Hyderabad, where he shared his expertise in urban history and design. His scholarly contributions extended further with his book titled Himalayan Cities, Settlement Pattern, Public Spaces and Architecture by New Publishers, New Delhi in 2014. Beyond academia, Professor Pratyush is a distinguished practitioner recognized with the 22nd J.K. Cement Architect of the Year Award in 2013 in the Residence Design category. His multidisciplinary approach to design and research is further reflected in his role as a guest professor at the Mundus Urbana program at Architecture Faculty, TU Darmstadt, Germany. As we gather today, we eagerly anticipate the insights and perspectives that he will share with us, drawing from his rich experience and expertise in academia, research, and design. Once again, a heartfelt welcome to Professor Pratyush Shankar. We're honored to have you here. I now call upon Professor Pratyush Shankar, Anirudh Paul, Manoj Parmar, and Rohan Shivkumar to launch the book History of Urban Forms of India, followed by Anirudh Paul to share his insights about the book.
Nobody else can find stuff.
हे लाईव्ह चालू आहे तिकडे बाहेर चालू आहे बघू शकतो separate
So I'll be very brief because I know that there is a presentation after this by Pratyush and also like a discussion after that. So I won't want to elaborate. I'll just talk about the book and the importance of this book. So this book, as you can already see, it speaks on the, or rather deals with the history of urban form. Okay. And I think that's very, very important. It deals with the morphology of city, and especially Indian cities. Now, in the contemporary times, as I say, I always believe that the discussion on cities, which has been formulated mainly by the Western world, the Western academia, I believe the focus on cities now is shifting to Asia. it's clear. It's very clear that like the Asian cities, phenomena which is not so well understood is something we have to research on. Okay. That's something which I believe because they are actually places which are unique in terms of this whole notion of and especially with these two ideas, which I always believe, the idea of control. I think idea of control is something which Pratyush has dealt with in his book, in the idea of looking at open form, and I believe that's a very important understanding. And with the idea of control comes the idea of the planned and the unplanned. Always that's the dichotomy which always comes into the Indian city or any cities in Asia. And that's why this book becomes very, very important. It looks at the morphological formation of right from history, right from the Indus Valley civilization. Though I know that the material, and also Pratyush writes about that, the materials are not always available. Certain period of time, the materials are not there at all. But it has been able to trace this very important journey. And also, importantly, in this book, I saw also that he has been able to compile a vast set of literature review he has done on various sources on where this material could be found. So this is a very important book for further research also. That's something which is very important. And obviously we will deal with the idea of some of the conceptual notions that is brought forth in the book in the discussion. But with that, I think the book which every architecture college needs to explore further and something which is very important for us as cities itself in India, that we need to look at a model of organization which is unique to our place. Looking at history is thus very, very important. With that, I call it Pratyush for the question.
And thanks for inviting me here. Thanks to the leadership at KRVI, Sonal, for coordinating everything. And Sonal Baker would be listening to me for the third time in 3 weeks. Yeah. So now we talked about cities last few weeks. Paul said it very nice pattern and about the need for such publication and such research. And what I'll do here, and by the way, science, your introduction is extremely global. I think you've added many words to my CV, like global, impact, and illustrious, which were not really needed. Yeah, but thanks for that. Celebrity. That's really like introducing you. That's also I think, our way of doing stuff. I was sitting on the photograph of this laptop and 8 people on this laptop and trying to figure out something. We're looking for the British style South Asian. There you are. I taught at SET for almost 2 decades. And since 2002, I used to take a course. When you were there, I was teaching drawing and painting. Specifically, that is started at the basement. And I used to take, subsequently, I moved to other courses also. I used to teach a course on urban history. And some of the old curriculums in Indian school will have this one course on either urban history or urban design. We had urban history, it was actually 6, like I used to teach, and then I started teaching it. And as I started teaching that course, there were 2 or 3 things that I began to notice. That the literature on Indian cities is less, that we already know that. But yes, by the time of Google Earth and GIS mapping, the information was increasing rapidly. So we had more documentation on Indian cities as well. But we did not have what I would like to call as conceptual frameworks to look at cities. So information is not enough. You need a viewpoint. And unfortunately, that viewpoint was missing. I'll come to the question of our Western viewpoint and Western constructs in a while, because I deal with that. The other problem I noticed, especially in architecture tourism, was almost this kind of called minor age. There was this whole group of professors or academics who saw the Indian cities as being so mystical, so virtuous, so beautiful. The anything of the past was ideal, And there was this kind of a sense of nostalgia or a sense of loss with it, that we have lost something that has gone away with rapid urbanization, modernization, whatever you want to call it. And that was almost like using this kind of an idealization, and you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes there's, I often use the word self-orientalism. That's something that has also been one of the issues. One could understand the late 70s and 80s when we are rediscovering India after the high modernist kind of era. But then now, this day and age, we need to look at it differently. And there was another school of thought that said that no, nothing doing, there's nothing of relevance. The past is stifling, it suffocates you, and you need a clean start. So I think that's also something that is peculiar to undergraduate and postgraduate programs in architecture schools across the country. In fact, we have a thing, and one of them is not based on kind of a rigorous scholarship. So what I'm also trying to do here is look at cities across the country. That's what I'm doing. I would have loved to actually include my work on Nepal, but then that becomes a kind of hard problem. A lot of my friends in Nepal are not happy with that. I'm in a parliament that where Nepal is in Bangladesh is part of the whole thing, and but this is all interconnected culture, of course, stuff to India. So what I'll just give a brief conceptual introduction before I go for materials so that they will need. So one is about categorization. And I think that's something I want to talk about, that we need to form, when you're looking at material, we need to form certain kind of categories. These are different cities that I've looked at. And these are the kind of categories which is very self-evident in front of you that have been formed now. Whenever I travel, whenever I'm presenting this book, I always have one person saying, hey, you forgot about that city. You forgot about this city, and that's always going to happen. So this is what it is. That's what I want to say. This is not a claim that this is the only category possible. That's one. I'm either making a claim that it covers everything possible. This is based on the material that we have. One can take this, recategorize, reconfigure, add, subtract, etc. But what it does is it does make an attempt to look at certain categories, and each category there is a viewpoint. Or that's what I want to talk about. Within, it's not simply a grouping of by geography or grouping by chronology. There is an argument that is emerging in each category. Whenever we do that, and I use drawings and representation a lot, and I'll talk about drawings in a while after I've shown something. I think we need to be very careful that we are not in any way proposing a deterministic theory or a universal theory of looking at cities. Now that can also be very dangerous. That I am going to tell you how cities are formed, its power, its landscape, this, that. So we are refraining from that. I think this is still early days. And as Paul very rightly says, I think I'm most excited about the literature, the first part. It's very useful for students, especially the ones who want to do research on cities. I spent like a lot of time in putting that together, and that literature survey can be a very good start point for your research. I'll just take you through some of the categories. For example, when we were looking at South Indian urbanism, we were looking at the temple towns as a prominent first physical example of cities. And this is a diagram. And of course, there's a lot of data that I do, especially in the case now. This is a diagram that you would be familiar with. But then we've seen it in all the schools. And there is this whole kind of an argument about Vastu Purush, sacred skies, the divine king, etc. And that's been the kind of logic that has been there. And I've been very curious about these cities, and I've been reading a lot and also looking at a lot of archival work. And what we begin to find right from where these cities are is the fact that these temple towns, temple administration is extremely intriguing from the point of view, and this is a very telling diagram. Okay, if you have to imagine these all these drawings in another aspect ratio. So just there's some technical problem, everything is squeezed. So that's the temple town in this case, Sri Rangam. And if you see down below, you see a lot of water bodies. 85 to 90% of these water bodies are not natural, which means that they are human constructs, which is quite fascinating. So I've been mapping the occurrences of temples and occurrences of patterns of modification of nature. And there emerges a very clear formal pattern, but also one can collaborate that with archival records as how temples were essentially implants and they were responsible for massive modification of nature all around. This modification of nature, which essentially meant, and we call them as hydrotrophic societies, this modification was central in creating a kind of surplus which went to the state. And it's so surprising the state itself is resetting. The temple becomes a proxy to the state that is carrying out water landscape modification. That is not only commissioning large-scale irrigation project. Now, the commissioning of large-scale irrigation project in urban studies is the most important indicator. Now, because to commission large-scale irrigation project, you have to mobilize resources, you have to mobilize people, and it cannot be done without commercial culture. So you talk about power. If you really want to understand these temple towns, I think you have to leave the divine diagram and basketball part of the site. And you have to essentially understand this as structure of power, structures of authority. And this whole diagram better show power. Because the kind of modification that we begin to find all across the temple town is still based. And hence, what one needs to, so I find the temple towns to be oppressive or authoritative. We are told where we live, where we stay, where the markets are, where the market will base, and that's not even a city. Now, the whole idea of the town or the city actually goes for towns. Because so it is, like you say, Singapore is not a city, it's a large corporate. That's a word we keep in the same kind of analogy that we use. And these are the kind of water structures that that we really find. So now going to Urban History 101. So works of Gordon Child, for example, I mentioned Gordon Child, works on Mesopotamia and Egypt, where they are looking at authority, control of water, and why we know that control water, you create surplus, you create cities. Yes. The creation of city is contingent on creating surplus in the countryside. So there is this very interesting and slightly disturbing relationship that we find in ancient science, where there has to be a level of authority, coercive authority control. It's a massive modification of nature, That's what I keep saying, that cities were not possible without modification. Nature outside and inside both. Right? And supposing you start looking at Vidanga, Madurai, not simply as, well, nice, beautiful diagrams, monumental gateway, but essentially see them as diagrams of kind of a city that have to possess that authority, because if you don't have that authority, you cannot create, you cannot modify it. So that's I'm just breaking into the frame. So you cannot, in this particular case, disconnect the city with the transformation of the countryside. And there are reports that these cities were not naturally emergent. The temples, and of course, religion has always been used to legitimize the state. Okay, the state itself is missing in that city. It's somewhere else, it's close by. It doesn't come out. So the temple becomes a proxy to the state. And temples were implanted. So if you had to create more surplus, you had to do better. Right? If you wanted to occupy more land, have more control, you put a temple. The moment you put a temple, the landscape begins to change. You have more water bodies, you have more production. The cities become bigger, you can attract more people. And that's a very fascinating relationship between countryside and I would say modification of countryside in the life of cities. So that's one of the earliest examples. So this is Deccan City, and Deccan City is I feel certain. That's one of those parts of history that I think is forgotten, especially amongst architects and modern designers. But it's a very important. These are, I feel, every area is very important because it also marks the early experiments or early efforts in kind of city making. Now, why was I interested in it? Two, three reasons. One, I was testing with pieces here. One is this whole question of Islam. We do know that there is a huge relationship between urbanization and Islam. So Islam essentially has been seen as a very urban religion. Because the merchants who were traveling from one city to another, and they were the ones who were carrying Islam. But also the whole idea of the Jami Mosque. A mosque with a rhetorical claim that the whole city can come. It's a city level institution. So that is one important marker. We look for as historians certain clues. Jami Mosque does offer that channel. Two of the whole city cannot find itself. But here there is some kind of a semblance, some kind of an idea. Hey, there is the idea of a city level of a mosque with a rhetorical claim that the whole city can begin to come in. So that's one line of discussion. Now, other discussion which is very relevant, and I think all of you need to be extremely aware of it, is where is the scholarship in from? So a lot of the Western European cities, and I admire them, and they existed in a different context. There were many of these cities, medieval cities, were autonomous. And there is this whole Bavarian max labor and importance of colleges framework that is often deployed. And that's something important if you're into urban studies to know. This whole idea of Protestant ethics, and then he argues the creation of mercantile schemes as one of the markers of formation of cities. So the argument is that it was the merchants that were funding the cities, that were making the gates, that were making the walls. And then, of course, as you were talking about Western scholarships, the argument is that a lot of these cities, and for them it was the exotic East that never had that kind of feelings or never had that kind of associations or professional municipalities and it comes to that wine. So it was also important to look for certain kind of frameworks that were beginning to exist, but we do begin to find, and I was more interested in form rather than looking for things that influence form. So there is a kind of a necklace-like pattern that begins to emerge. In most of the cities, we have a palace in the center, or off center, we have the gate, and the Jami Mosque, almost like a engine right in the center. So that's one major we begin to discuss. Sonal was last year, a few days back, asking me, someone in the audience, that why aren't you getting into details? Why we stick to these very abstract diagrams? And this is what these diagrams do. I'm able to move from one city to another without getting burdened by details. And when you begin to move from one city to another, a constant pattern begins to emerge. So in this case, it is, if you really ask me what is the form of a Deccan city, whether it was a palace, it was a gate, it was a Jami Mosque, forming like a village. There's nothing else. Everything else just happens. Everything else, I would say, is an infill. It can fill in any which way. Another thing that we were looking at, and of course we have these two prominent institutions, mosque and other stuff. But then the other question we begin to ask is, what about the idea of public place? And is there an idea of public? So these are also cities that are mixed in terms of religion, past. That's where things become extremely interesting. In fact, cities, and that's where I feel we have to examine history with a stick. It's very important to examine history with a stick and not and see from present perspective. In fact, these cities fail to create public places within borders of the city. In fact, the release of the public happens outside and not inside the city. Now, this is very intriguing, and this is something which is uniquely India. Now, why does it happen outside and not inside? And we discovered like two things. It's not even a discovery, it's just an acknowledgement. The tombs outside the city but actually the real public place. That was one. The Sufi saint sitting outside the city was actually the real public place. And in fact, these cities formed a tradition of people taking a walk outside the city every few days, spending the whole day at the place of the dead. And this is where all the communities got together. Because if you are at the Dargah of a Sufi state, you are not asked to be. So this is very intriguing. It is not the city of the living that provides place for people to gather together and forget their identity. You know, and I've used this word quite often. Cities are not reserves of community or cannot be reserves of community. And cities, in some sense, have to offer the possibility of something or coming together. So it is these tools. So this is where morphological study comes in, where you city after city, you begin to see this pattern, and when you draw it one after another, you seem to discover this kind of pattern. These are the kind of, this is also there in the cover page. This is the necropolis, the Qutb site, or site roll probably. That's what it says about the Indian city, right? So you go out to socialize with the other in your city, you know, or you go out to meet other people in cities. So that's one when we were looking at Deccan city. So if I have to diagram this, so of course we have to sit there and do that. We have to work. So these are all standard things for defense. I'm not getting into the boring stuff, even in my book, because that's given. I'm more interested in the unique kind of framework that I can derive from each of these categories. So I was talking about this whole thing about the mosque in the center and one where the city is a big. But then there is something on the other side. So that's the framework that we derived for cities there in the Deccan. I also looked at cities in Gujarat and Rajasthan, and here, you know, we had very good records of the Marwaris funding a Dharamshala, right? And this Dharamshala was meant as a kind of boarding school or boarding lodge for young boys, of course, coming from the village and who wanted to start trading with their cousins. So that's a clue. That's a clue because that's an initiative. There is a transformation. There is something new. A new institution has been put up so that they can live the life of the city, so that they can learn how to do trade in the city. So that's again, we have not really looked at the role of mercantile community. I keep talking about the fact that it is these guilds and the other guilds all over the country, wherever we have, especially Rajasthan and Gujarat, where these guilds have decided to sold, they have decided the taxes, they are funding the making of the war, they are funding the making of the gate. Right? It is the merchants' money that is quite used to make the city safe. And it is in their interest the city remains safe. We call often the city as the fortified market. So a lot of cities of Ahmedabad, and again, in some sense, I would call Ahmedabad as just a fortified market. That's where it begins. That where it begins. There is a role of merchant, but Ahmedabad absolutely does not create the idea of public. In fact, it is one of the most, it's a failure in terms of historic failure in terms of creating spaces for people to get together. And I'm not surprised. Cities that historically fail to get people together are hotspots of communal violence, are hotspots of communal violence. So there's another kind of a relationship that it is. And similarly, we were looking at apartments. So we call this organic infrastructure work, or generic is another word. Essentially, these are market schemes. Yeah. One of the areas that I've also been looking at is Mughal cities, and I find these cities to be a radical departure when it comes to their relationship with the immediate landscape, because for the very first time, the local geography is not only understood from the point of view of defense, of protection, but there is an idea of view to nature that we need to locate a palace to view. I don't think that idea existed before. There could be 2 or 3 reasons. One is this whole argument that was given by a lot of scholars about the sense of nostalgia. They coming from where they're coming from, and in the dusty hot plains of India, they're looking for more. That could be one. Second argument, of course, could be the fact that once it's an empire, it is extremely secure. So you can locate where you want to locate, but walls are never that high sometimes. It's a very secure thing. I mean, and the fact that we had riverside, Havelis, riverfront properties. So this is the first, I would call Agra and Shahnamar as the first riverfront. I'm not sure if the people knows that, but these are the first example of riverfront and riverfront Havelis that came around that time, and it comes with the good idea. The second area, and that's what I was looking at, the Mughal cities was very exciting for me. It was also this whole idea of one, the kind of cosmopolitan beliefs that existed in the city for the very first time. Not for the very first time, but in large numbers. So if you look at Stephen Blake's work on Shahjahanabad is very, very important. In fact, I would recommend that you read that if you're interested. And Stephen Blake argues that it's not Islam, it's not the Jami Mosque if you want to understand what the cities. You have to look at the royal household, right? So the patriarchal bureaucratic royal household during the Mughal period is the important reference to make. So where their Havelis are, how they look at the idea of a palace, which is actually a garden, will be important to you. So I was very curious about line of query. But then we also kind of started looking at other things like the tent city. Now, there is no drawings available of the tent city, but this is totally on looking at reading descriptions of different travelers and trying to reconstruct what this tent city was. During it was 40% of the time of a Mughal king was spent in the city. And he was not in your city like Shahjahanabad or Agra. So this city would move, and it was very important for them why they were moving, because it was very clear to them. To control a vast territory like India, you have to have face-to-face contacts. So these were moves, they would move across the territory. They would move across different parts of the country for years, and these cities are moving so that they can meet their whatever their some their Mansab and all. But then the question is, what happens to the city that the city itself is near? Yeah. And no wonder there is this whole idea of Shahjahanabad looking like a camp. You know, we might glorify Shahjahanabad and all that, but most of the time, Shahjahanabad was hollowed out. Because when the king moves, so moves so many merchants and so many important people. So this is so unique. So what we call a city is actually temporary and gets hollowed out and is never allowed to stabilize. So one of the things, and I think that is something we all need to remember, the question of autonomy. Cities become cities when they are autonomous. But when you are part of the large empire, which is extremely mobile, because the thing is kind of moving across the countryside, the city itself is a hospital. Again, it's another interesting sector. I just taking too much time now. This is good area. Colonial urbanism, and I've kind of used a comparative framework, and I make a distinction between the word colonial cities. And I think perhaps it's a very broad stroke to use. One, colonial history is massive. I mean, 200, 300, 400 years. So there is not just one colonial. That's one. Secondly, there is a distinct way in which the Britishers approach the idea of the city. In fact, a leading idea of city planning. I would like to call it patchwork. I would like to call it opportunist kind of planning. In fact, we have private records where the British, whatever general is reprimanded when he goes back, because why do we spend on the road? The only thing it's supposed to spend on is actually building. The first phase of British intervention in cities, of course, they don't need the word city, but they have a long idea of the plan. It only comes much later. And so I've looked at cities as patchwork. And for example, even if you look at Calcutta, opportunities like we have in depending on an area that has to be there around a port for strategic reasons. for defense reasons that is coming from the company legacy. And then that becomes a place as the city grows, certain institutions that are coming much later. So you have maybe a stronger idea of architecture or the monumentality of architecture that's the one area that I feel the Britishers did real innovation is what we call as illustration, right? In fact, the first systematic mention was made by Raoul Melville when he talks about, this was like way back in the 90s in one of his publications. He talks about the illustration as a cultural kind of settlements. And they were cultural in the sense that there was no strategic reason to have a city, right? There was no strategic reason sometimes to have a city, but it was essentially family stations. Have you noticed here, this is an abstracted plan of Shimla. I've studied Himalayan cities for a very long time. You never build on a ridge that has slopes on both sides. Typically, you always find cities built on the slope where I can, from the top of the slope, get some melting snow as drinking water and have a kind of farmland to go. But this is built on a hump, So if I were to take a section, I don't know, a section here, you notice the whole city is like a snake. It's built on both sides, and that's what you like to stay. When you go there, when you're standing on the street, you see on both sides. Then you have a society points and all this. It's very dramatic. There is this idea of, again, it's a family station, home away from home. And this is a departure. This is an innovation. And then the question is, where do you get the water from? When you have all the Indians to get water from. And you create underground, we need underground tanks. How will you get drinking water? So we need underground tanks. But we need small scale drinking water. How do you get there? That's what is the problem. Because they're not using the slope to advantage. I think that, to my mind, was very interesting. And I've kind of looked at colonial cities as essentially patchwork and how an opportunity to look at these open areas. I thought in earlier courses that were created. There's another kind of, there's so really of appropriation of British colonial cities. It was also propounded by, I think, Prakash Kedambi's work, where he says, how, again, this whole problem of fine. I don't believe in this capacity by cities. Frankly speaking, I think there were conversations, there were stops, there was appropriation. Prakash Kedambi goes on to argue that all the open spaces that the Britishers created as to go down to their buildings were actually the places where the most important freedom speakers were made. So, this whole idea of Anthony King, so Anthony King's work on Delhi became a reference for this black town, white town, in which I feel is problematic. They are not such neat categories. And you compare that with the French centralized planning. And here we have example of Louis XVI or somebody personally supervising, of course, when I make a plan, where the plan is developed, personally supervising the plan of conditioning, So, and French come with their landscape and with their vast plains, they have a tradition in centralized planning. So when I'm looking at colonial urbanism, I'm also looking at what they were doing before and what they were doing after. Algiers is a very beautiful example where an old city existed. And the new city on the left is made like a mirror of the old. That shows about, because we're also looking at it, always talking about plan. So that's the kind of thing. The thought that I was looking at. The Portuguese urbanism is of great interest and there are people, unfortunately, of history, I was telling my last lecture, in Oxford kinds of domain. It's really not, it's very difficult to cover in most architecture schools. Geography departments also don't cover it. We don't have open study center as much, right? But if you look at they were building cities. This is essential. Look at Nagasaki, look at Salim, look at Lisbon. So they are coming with the tradition of cities. That's very interesting. They're not only coming with the tradition of cities, but they're also coming with the kind of an urban tradition of what they call as professional municipalities. And certain urban practices like the parades, you have all these what you call parades and whatever that happens in the city are also promoted by the municipality. These are not necessarily cultural events, but these are events that bring people together. So the Portuguese colonial experimental experience is very different. One, they're concentrated on the port, and the ports are naturally kind of I would say, an emporium of people, of gathering people of different ethnicity. And it is the municipality, along with the church, and with some sense of loyalty. And these are the different kind of power centers that we begin to look at, or they begin to see when we look at Portuguese urbanism. That gives Portuguese urban town a distinct character, which is very different. I mean, if we do notice that at fun, it is distinct from the British colonial experience. And here I'm very curious about the role of municipalities that was central in bringing an idea of the civic, if I may use the word, some semblance of civic, some creation of a public place. So I'm getting at the role of the Catholic Church, the municipality as kind of being some sense of a urban, and that also reflects the formation of the city. So that's the kind of work that we do. I'll just end with this particular area, which is in fact my favorite, because I feel this is one area that needs a lot of work. We say colonial period, and that's like a big trunk. And so there is a very long history. And there is enough diversity in that history. One area to be very closely would be what we call as princely cities. Why princely cities is of interest to urban historians like us? Because the princely cities were under what we call as an indirect rule, right? So the British were not directly the direct rule and indirect rule. It's like the Pradesh were direct rule, but parts of Gujarat, bulk of Rajasthan, indirect. The prince, as they were called, were not called king, had a say in civic matters. They did not have a say in military matters or economic matters, but they had a say in civics. So theoretically speaking, they can actually do a lot. And this kind of a condition, this non-rural kind of a condition, where you do have a British officer in your court, a British agent in the city who is supervising, but these cities are also paying a lot of taxes. Or enough people that are not spending, other than the state. And they have the kind of a hold, right? And it is in this kind of a very strange, partial autonomous condition that some very exciting experiments happen. I think we need to kind of look closely. So, 6 minutes is long story, but for example, this is the time where a lot of architects, librarians, gardeners are hired directly by these rulers. They are not, they might have worked for the British state, but they are from all nationalities. They are international professionals. I mean, we have these accounts of one of the Baroda, doing interviews in one of the gardens in I think in the UK, and he's calling these gardeners of the world to give an interview as to who will become the gardener of the state of Baroda. Right, so that's the kind of agency that these princely cities have. So some of these princely states utilize that agency very well to get something interesting done. One of the very interesting things, and I think Sona knows a lot about that, is what we call as a library movement in the state of Baroda, where the king and whatever administration ensure that there is a library built in each and every Calcutta and each and every town of the Baroda state, and where there was no library or full of carrying the books were there. And there are these accounts of young kids being taken to the library, something we find, we always say, in Europe, when we go to the museum, we find kids there. These kids were already doing that in 1880s and 1890s, taking young kids, making the education, encouraging education of the girl child. And this library go and visit it is very significant. Well, architecturally, yes, but it is a very significant urban institution that gets created. So here again, there's another discussion that opens up, and I think here there was a lot of work on the question of institutions, like Seth has been very curious about. So urban institutions, and the words we have institutions to give a lot of them, is very significant from the point of view of its symbolic or it is a symptom of a larger idea that the city wants to be. So an idea of a library is a very, very important indicator for us. As much as large scale engineering projects, cities are built by transformation. I don't believe cities can happen on their own. Cities need, and how you use the word, you have to take care of nature to make cities. You have to transform things to bring people together. On their own, they might just make their own community reserves, as happened in many, many cities in there. In fact, they were not able to bring people together. So large scale irrigation projects, the idea of a university, right? A college that is built as a Baroda College, it comes in 1881, it becomes a university later, and it was referred to as a rebel university because most British officers did not want modern education to come to Baroda. I'm not using Baroda, I'm just using Baroda because I'm familiar with it, but technically will apply from many other cities. Even small cities like London and Rajput, which I'm familiar with in Gujarat. And the creation of a university that will bring talents from all over the world into the city is a very important indicator, an idea of new institutions, vocational study college. And towards the end, I'll tell you how it impacts city form. We have these young kids, I think this seems to be, maybe they're trained to repair watches, as I can make out. By the way, I studied in this institution. I studied architecture in this 1990s. This was a photographic in material line. And it was a vocational training, color and training, like the vocational training places. And so this whole idea of new inspiration, education for observers, etc., begins to take shape through this whole partial autonomy business, where the prince can decide what they really want to do with it. But then you have this very interesting example of a botanical garden. And the botanical garden, which is a designed public garden, and this is not a borrowed garden in front of the palace technically, this is a garden that is made. But the fact that this whole idea of classification, this whole garden with a museum inside, in fact becomes the window to the scientific world, it becomes the window to the world at large, which is outside. So if I begin to look at gardens, if I begin to look at public park, and this public park, on its very first week, there is this announcement that one day of the week, only women will use this park. It itself shows a lot that they wanted the women to come out and go out in the public. City building activity is actually an activity can be seen as an activity of social reform. Yeah, and that's the larger kind of an argument that I'm saying that this museum, of course, you can look at this museum as something that I think about the idea game, that's also the case. Why against the timeline or the last year and this, but then it has these animals that are classified using the modern discriminate system. And I think in my mind, very so there is this kind of an effort to open up the city to the world outside, and I think that's important. The question really is how does it impact on reform? Because this thesis study is not about really social reforms. If I begin to, and that's what we started doing, the square is actually your old city. If we can call it the medieval world. What happens, and I'm always looking for when do you break the wall and go out? Because unless you break the wall and go out, you do not create an idea of the city. As much as we say the beauty lies in, but also can in fact argue this the reverse of it. And these institutions come outside, come away from, and they better be away because if they are inside, they are arbitrary. They come at a distance from the main city. This is a plan of Baroda as it would have been during 1880s and 1890s, when it was very prominent institutions, an institution representing a new idea of a society began to come. And over the years, the city grows around these institutions. So when you go to a lot of these princely cities, the armature, the present day armature of the city, the present day form of the city, is actually built because of certain key things that happened perhaps in the 20th century. And let me tell you, cities transform very rapidly. I mean, there are records of 300, 200 BC, where they say in India, the emergence of cities happened in one's lifetime. So a whole Indian whatever landscape from the rural to urban perhaps beginning in 30, 40 years. And that is one, so I use the word social institution from the new armatures. So whenever we go to these cities, we feel something different. You know, quite often there are no two sides of the road. That would be commercial or that would be private. We always have one land work going, some other institution goes like this. So that's what I have. I mean, if I tell you everything, nobody will buy the book. But this has been my way of looking at things, and of course, this is quite a vast area, and I wanted it to be vast because if I'm not, again, I'm going back to our discussion with Sonal and colleagues that sometimes to be not get lost in details is very important. And for me to be able to look at 5 or 6 cities together is the only way where I will start discovering certain frameworks. And that goes hand in hand with the way we draw. If you notice, there is a lot of abstraction that is there. The strip of things that is not needed. So one is just trying to, make certain. I'm just giving certain viewpoints that might allow you to look at cities. But I still see it as very early days in scholarships. One can take this matter and turn it around, create new categories, create new frameworks. That's why I said literature survey is a good start point for any serious scholars if you want to do a PhD or master's thesis or something. But I felt when I started from this date that I want to create something that is useful for scholars. Scholars means both professors and students, because there's nothing, in fact, which tells me a book on learning history of India that is literature. And the only book we are reading is that Baker, something which is like very, very, those diagrams, the swastika and the radial and all that. So thank you so much for listening. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
बरोबर आहे, एकदम परफेक्ट. बॅक साईडला काय टाकतं मध्ये काय
Okay, I know that we are running out of time, so we would like to initiate a discussion. Okay, and maybe take 2-3 questions from the audience also. But before that, I would like to start with a few questions to confuse so that we can start the discussion. Okay. Pratish, you very clearly did speak of these notions of abstractions and the fact that you actually are more interested in these abstractions. The abstractions are absolutely important. They form the diagrams of cities. So, and you also spoke of the notion of categorization. Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this notion of categorization? So I see when I read your book also, I realized that you have formed very important categories, and one of the categories which I like, especially in your earlier chapter, is the notion of looking at cities as regions, like where you looked at cluster cities and you're looking at aspects of environment, aspects of how they get connected, how they control larger regions. Okay. So if you can talk a little bit more about how do you categorize these cities which are there in these places.
So I think I just need to, there's a long answer to this because when I started one of my televisions, and one of the topics that was accepted and I started work on it for years was to be able to create the Indian urban history to categories of geography. So I started. So if I were to look at the plains of the range, for example, if I look at Aravallis, if I look at geographical region of Gujarat, then I make a whole district of cities to geography. I abandoned that gateway because it works for a certain time period, but then it begins to fade. And that, I think that definition was very important. So for a certain time period, when you have certain kind of, let's say, a political system that is exploiting your community, right? You are able to use that as a way to categorize. So I might call it cities of floodplains as a category that would distribute. But the moment there is another sophistication or another complexity in the society, it could be economic, it could be trade, it could be monetary kind of sophistication or political sophistication, that category of geography fails, and then you need another category. So I have created another category, which I said it is very important. Cities of organized states, cities that are part of large states like Mughal Empire, right? The British colonial cities, the Portuguese colonial, because it is a network of an empire, and the city is one of the subsets. So I think one of these categories, I mean, there is a geographical bias to it, I think, but also geographic in some sense, so, it's the geography of, let's say, Rajasthan and Gujarat that creates a mercantile economy. And that becomes a category. So one has to use it as a starter and then a market. But then as I was also discussing, I think I would qualify it that only coastal or port cities as emporium of cosmopolitanness. That could be another category. So then I can pick up some cities from here and then put it together. So this is my view on categories. And still I would say work on properties, but I had to stop it after so many years and say, hey, this is where I write that. But yeah, so it starts with geography, but there's also that's an island to look at other kind of political devices or other idea of money. That's something that all about.
So this is my last question before I pick the audience the questions. Now, to take from here. So the thing is that you speak of these abstractions, and the last moment also showed how the city of Baroda used through this set of pointers, markers, which were the basic framework. So right from the Islamic city also similar. So now the question which comes, and you refer to them as infills. Right. How does that get negotiated between the markers and the infills? Because it's a very important question for us, because in today's time, I'm talking about it from a contemporary form of urbanization, where we are always creating these markers, and the infills are completely not understood very clearly. We call them the informal, and we have sometimes relegated them to not even any sort of observation. So how does that historically, these processes, and did you find in history that these infills have a certain way of organizing themselves, which we can learn from?
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, in infills, quite often we find that a wall is created first, and the city is an infill with a few markers. So one is about infills itself, and I feel that infills is something very central to more to this part of the world. The second question is a bit informal. I mean, even if I look at town planning schemes today, I would like to draw them a little first. The reason is that a lot of the PG schemes that we are witnessing doesn't show a long view in any case. It looks planned, but it is an infill of real estate that makes so I think that's why we go to most of the target. It just happens organically from the point of view of what eventually happens organically because it is a land market that is created. So there is no brand vision that you have a park here. this is where people will gather. This is where institutions will come. I mean, Rohan visited our university. We have housing societies and pop community university. So I think we need to problematize the idea of infill. One, I am not in favor of seeing too much in it. Sometimes we want to see too much. I think it is an adjustment to the fact that we want to live. I mean, we need to survive. And we need to survive. We need to live together. So sometimes, and we've seen this kind of an over, they're looking for something very profound. It is adjusted. If you look at one of the earliest cities like Fort, in Mesopotamia, if you look at how people were living, I don't think it is very different from how people are living now, because that's how people live. Right? So it is a basic common sense of, having said that, in certain cities, we do find, this is where I would begin to make a distinction. In certain historic cities, you do find the roads naturally, and this is my work in Nepal, the roads naturally were working like trains, and they were able to take out water extremely effectively, even though you might not like to use the word plants to use that. So, increase is a large category, and I think within that there would be 2 or 3 different attitudes.